for giving just a moment here to let people trickle in from the Zoom waiting room. To those who are bumping up our numbers, thanks for joining us tonight. I see the numbers are still climbing, so we'll give it a little bit more time. But we're excited to have you here this week. I know it's been a few weeks since we've hosted one of these webinars. If you're newly turning in, this is Catherine Small from the HEALEY and AMG Center at Massachusetts General Hospital, calling in from Boston and accompanied by Suma Babu, Dr. Suma Babu, who will be our host this evening. And I'll leave it to Dr. Babu to introduce our two special guest speakers of honor tonight. If we head to the next slide.
Great. Thank you, Catherine. Good afternoon, everyone. Today we have two very special guest speakers for joining us on this webinar. We have David and David joining us today. Let me introduce Dr. Walk. Dr. Walk is Professor of Neurology and the Neuromuscular Division Chief at the University of Minnesota. And Dr. Walk will introduce Mr. David Kolquist as well. Dr. Walk, you take it away.
Yeah, David Kolquist is a remarkable individual that, much like others, I'm sure on the webinar and on the panel, have seen what ALS can do to people firsthand, and took it upon himself to create one of the most, I think, extraordinary ALS organizations, Never Surrender, which has raised millions of dollars through some very innovative and kind of Minnesota-specific fundraisers to really make a big difference in the lives of people living with ALS and to help us with moving forward with ALS clinical research, which is what we'll be talking about today. So we'll have an opportunity for me to talk a little bit about what we're being able to do at University of Minnesota, thanks to the HEALEY Center and to Never Surrender, and then he'll tell us a little bit more about Never Surrender itself. Dr. Babu, would you like me to move it on, or okay? So we'll go on to my part of the webinar. So as everybody knows, we need to find better treatments, and while the scientists are teaching us more about what actually is happening with ALS, we have to take their clues and move them forward into ideas that could be tried now, today, not waiting for all of the answers to come through. People may not fully recognize that the infrastructure for clinical trials is limited. Even if there's a great new idea and a pharmaceutical company that wants it tested, they have to raise the funding, and they don't raise the funding for us to have the personnel to do the work. That's even more the case with expanded access studies, which we'll talk about a little bit in a moment. Many of the people who are attending, I'm sure, are very familiar with those. But expanded access studies are often even, they're kind of bridge opportunities as we learn more about a drug to get more people to have the opportunity to try them. And we, of course, have limited locations where there's the expertise to do the studies. So the solution to this important problem comes from the folks who are on this call. Of course, the HEALEY Center has the greatest experience in the US, maybe the world, in terms of clinical trials in ALS and specifically expanded access programs, and can help provide folks like myself with a kind of a ready-to-roll expanded access opportunity. And Never Surrender has provided extraordinary support for the infrastructure so that we have ongoing the ability to maintain the personnel that we need to carry through some of these programs. So thanks to that, we have been able to set up sites for expanded access in the state of Minnesota. On the right is just an example of a flyer kind of illustrating that partnership, where Dr. Sokovich, Dr. Erickson, and I had an opportunity to be part of a panel with Never Surrender in the wonderful city of Duluth, Minnesota, which everybody should have an opportunity to visit. And the ability to kind of get together like that is not only, I think, very helpful for people living with ALS and their families, but it's also a delight for us because we get to spend some time together and really share what we know and share our ideas. So let's go to the next slide. Okay. So specifically with regard to expanded access, both at Essentia in Duluth and at University of Minnesota in Minneapolis, this EAP program was born, and we are now recruiting individuals. Expanded access, for those who may be less familiar, are the way I describe it to people we see in our clinic is they're clinical trials for people who don't qualify for clinical trials. And for decades in ALS, um, we've had situations where somebody is quite understandably quite preoccupied with trying to live every day as best they can, and not in an opportunity to be in a research study. But then on the other hand, there are many people who are extraordinarily motivated to participate in research and very disappointed that the strict inclusion criteria for placebo-controlled trials does not allow them to participate. So with expanded access, we now have the opportunity, if it's available, to enroll folks in a test where they can take a medication that isn't yet proven but has some hope, and it provides two things. First, it's an opportunity for that individual to be involved in clinical research. And importantly, very importantly, it's an opportunity for those who are studying the treatment to, number one, get more information about its long-term safety and to see how it works in the broader population. Because as we all know, most clinical trials are enrolling a limited number of people living with ALS, and if we get a hit and it proves to be beneficial, there's always that open question, well, what effect does this have in people who would not have qualified? Expanded access gives us a little information about that, and we're even at the point with statistical modeling where we can try to kind of get a sense as to how would this compare to people who are just like the people in the study but would not have been on the medication. So it's really a win-win to have an EAP. We are starting with pridopidine, which many of you are familiar with because it was in the platform trial. Pridopidine has some promise in certain very specific circumstances, and I know the sponsor is still hoping to show a greater benefit in a phase 3 trial. So this is a wonderful opportunity for people in Minnesota. And again, the fact that Never Surrender had the foresight to recognize that not everybody can get to one city or another, as it is only 2 sites is limiting, but this gives us a chance to kind of provide this throughout our state. The other great thing about this kind of funding is it's kind of like a platform trial for EAPs because providing the infrastructure means that we can add on a second and a third relatively easily, and that's what we're doing. We're adding on more expanded access programs so that we can keep this opportunity going. Next slide. And then finally, we did sneak this in a little bit because we're anticipating yet further funding. And this, as you can see, has been provided by several funders at several locations. But in our case, again, thanks to Never Surrender, what's called Acceleration Center of Enrollment. And this is taking a similar concept but making it broader. Not only do we need EAPs, but obviously placebo-controlled trials and what we call observational studies or translational research, which we've had the great opportunity to do a great deal of here at the University of Minnesota. We can only learn about ALS from people living with ALS, whether that means following the course of their condition and sharing de-identified data sets, obtaining blood, spinal fluid, tissue samples, whatever we can do, MRI scans, to learn more about the disease from the people who are kind enough to dedicate their time to helping us do that. So with the Acceleration Center of Enrollment, we anticipate ongoing, consistent support for all of the work that involves. That involves research coordinators, research associates, statisticians, time on MRI scanners, all of that. We need consistent funding so that we can continue to do the work that we're doing. So that's another big shout out and thank you to Never Surrender and David Kolquist, and as an example of how it takes more than just great ideas. It actually takes ongoing, consistent support to make progress. So thank you for the opportunity to say a few words, and I'll hand it over from there.
Thank you so much, Dr. Walk. Mr. Kolquist, would you like to say a few words?
Yeah, thank you. I'm honored to be part of this and excited to be part of it. I thought I would just kind of share my story as president of Never Surrender. Back in September 4th, the exact date, 1995, my brother Kevin was diagnosed with ALS, 42 years old, very healthy individual. Went to the Mayo Hospital in Rochester, Minnesota, and came home with the ALS diagnosis. That was on a Friday. The following Monday, got on the phone, started calling to find out how I could get involved and how we could help. And at that point, there really wasn't even an ALS association. It was under the MDA Association, which helped ALS patients. So started calling there. My background is I'm a businessman, and I had watched and been involved for many years fundraisers. We had the largest MDA fundraiser at the time in Duluth. And if we can move to the next slide. And what I kind of learned and realized in a lot of these fundraisers that were being put on, it was kind of easy to do. For the first year, somebody was freshly diagnosed. There was a lot of energy and excitement about the event and in the community. But then 4 or 5 years, the energy, people get sick, people die, and where does the event go? So when we were looking to start Never Surrender, I was determined to build events that lasted. And they always say a cocktail party is good for year 1 or 2, but it'll never last. So what we did, and the big key there to being successful in the business world, it's called reoccurring revenue. And that's the event that will continue generating funds every single year. So Never Surrender, we created, and I get way too much credit. I'm one of probably 200 volunteers. We're a volunteer-run organization. For the first 4 years, we had 1 employee, and now we have 2. We are run by volunteers. We have a volunteer board, volunteer accountant, volunteer attorney. Volunteer boards run all our events. So we have 3 what we call red carpet events. The first is a Kohler Toyota. It's a fishing tournament in northern Minnesota that's held in June. Last year was our 29th year, and that event raised the most dollars it had ever raised in the 29th year. And we're excited about this year will be our 30th year. The second event is the Blackwoods Blizzard Tour, a snowmobile event in northern Minnesota. Last year celebrated its 25th year and raised over $2 million. And the neat part about that is we didn't have any snow in Minnesota. So nobody rode a snowmobile, and we raised over $2 million. That event has been sold out for 14 straight years, and it's an unbelievable event. And then the last event that we just started 2 years ago is the Tomasoni Tour. And that is named after the late David Tomasoni, who was an ALS patient and passed away, but he spent the last year and a half of his life raising funds for ALS and was successful in lobbying $25 million for ALS in the state of Minnesota. That event ran a year ago as a pilot project. It raised $156,000. This year, our official first year raised $280,000 for ALS. If we can go to the next slide, it's really the slide that we're proud of. We call up and to the right. And as a business person, you just don't see this type of continued growth every year, especially in the last couple of years. The red are highlighted. COVID years, we were still able to have our events that were virtual and raise money, which was pretty incredible. And I'm proud to say in the calendar year of 2024, we have donated over $2 million to help in the battle against ALS. And we were the ones, as Dr. Wack mentioned, have brought EAP to Minnesota. We also helped fund the HEALEY platform trial. And I guess if you ask, how does EAP kind of circle home to me? So in 1995, my brother battled ALS for 10 years. The last 5 years, he was on a ventilator. And back then, there was only one FDA-approved drug, which was Rulitech, which extended your life a little bit. And he came up with the saying, hope drives life. And really, the hope he was talking about is EAP. And we're so proud to be part of the group working with Dr. Merit Sokovich, Dr. Erickson in Duluth, Dr. Wack at the University of Minnesota, and bringing that to, EAP to Minnesota. When we got started, it was very simple. We're not about trading dollars. We're about making dollars. As I said, we're run by volunteers. We don't have an office. And we're really serious about making the difference. And we have a lot of good people working together.
Thank you, Mr. Kolquist. This is truly so remarkable. Hope really drives life, and what you have done, what Never Surrender has done for ALS patients in Minnesota is just so wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Walk, for supporting all of these initiatives. And I'm super excited about the ACE initiative. And I think not a lot of people in the community recognize how much work actually happens on the in the background to make these studies work and happen. And when a patient walks in, completes their study visit and leaves, everything works so smoothly. But how much of planning and effort has gone into making that smooth visit, I think is often underappreciated, and just bringing all of these resources to really accelerate ALS research is just so amazing. Thank you for doing that. There are a couple of questions here. Maybe the first question is for Dr. Walk. Do you believe we could now create a cocktail of medications between FDA-approved medications, EAP medications, and over-the-counter supplements that could halt or come close to halting progression? If so, what would we realistically need to do to get people with ALS access to a cocktail of medications to slow the disease progression?
So that's a really interesting question. So I guess the way I would look at it, and I'm curious what Dr. Babu thinks, but I think so. There are two things there. One is identifying a benefit of an individual treatment, which I think anybody living with ALS, to their understandable frustration, has found is extraordinarily difficult and a complex matter, because we always wonder, even if something doesn't show obvious or striking benefit, if there's a subset of individuals that might respond better. And then I guess the other kind of inherent question is there such a thing in this context as a whole that's greater than the sum of the parts? Is there some sort of kind of multiplicative effect of drug A, B, and C working better than drug A, drug B, or drug C individually? And I don't think anybody knows the answer to that. What we do know is that things that are being studied for ALS, at least we believe, have different potential ways of working. Even then, we're not always sure, because riluzole, for example, was originally thought to work in one mechanism, and there might subsequently have been others that have been identified. So it's a long-winded answer. I think the best answer is we do need to test things individually, and when things seem to have some benefit, we absolutely add them on, and that's of course what we're doing right now with the FDA-approved drugs. Dr. Babu, any thoughts about that?
I completely agree with you, Dr. Walk. And in addition to that, I would just add that safety is an important consideration. Anytime you're creating a cocktail of various different medications and supplements together, we always have to be mindful and thoughtful about how they might interact with one another, and just thinking about safety in addition to whether there is a benefit. I think very reasonable. When we talk about safety, not just about ALS related, we think about what effect does it have on the liver, what about on the kidneys, and all the other things. And then there's another question about how do we understand, because EAPs, many of the EAPs are funded through NIH-funded grants and Act for ALS, and then there is also support from Never Surrender. So how do we distinguish how the two granting or supporting groups are creating synergies, and how are they different and how are they similar?
I'd like to start with that, although I think maybe everybody who's here could make a comment, but that's also a very important and insightful question. Clearly, what we don't want to do is pay for the same thing twice. I think the point that I was emphasizing with what the opportunity through Never Surrender is infrastructure, in the sense that we're able to employ, in large part, personnel, but sometimes there are other expenses, such as space, pharmacy, other kind of things that are required. So we're using that largely to maintain the team and the availability to do the work. And the studies themselves, whether the funding is from NIH or from the sponsor, are often covering the other costs, such as developing the protocol, making the medication, shipping it, doing a lot of the supervisory work of the study. So there are different components, and they're covering different parts of it. I don't know if either of you would like to elaborate on that any further.
That's great, Dr. Wong. And there's another question again for Dr. Wong. What's your best guess or assessment with all the research that's ongoing in terms of when can we expect a cure for ALS?
Yeah. So a few things. First of all, I'm optimistic that there are things like the ones we're talking about today that will make meaningful benefit. And as with every disease, when we talk about, the cure, it may turn out to be several different approaches, several different options, various combinations, and personalized medicine. So I think that we are making progress towards approved medications that will make a meaningful difference. I think we're also identifying certain, of course, gene-specific therapies that might be real breakthroughs. And also trying to get a better understanding of what each individual's ALS looks like, because we hope that there are specific mechanisms that might be more relevant. So one person might respond better to a drug targeting inflammation principally. Another person might respond to a drug targeting something different. I also am personally excited about some of the things that are being learned about the underlying mechanisms of ALS, because if you really understand a disease, you've got a much better chance of figuring it out. So if you'll permit me a moment, the recognition of what happens when RNA metabolism isn't working correctly, when genes are not being turned into RNA appropriately, when it's not being spliced appropriately, we're getting proteins that don't work or shouldn't be there. When TDP-43 is in the wrong part of the cell doing the wrong things, what's happening with the nuclear pore? I mean, these are fundamental kind of scientific observations that I think will kind of get us faster to real things. So I've been optimistic from day one about very effective treatments in ALS. And I feel like we really are getting there, and we are getting closer. But I'm also always mindful that when I say that, I'm saying that to people who are living with it today and are dealing with the progression, often rapid, today. And so I never want to, I always want to be mindful that the hope also has to be tempered with the reality that we don't know when that day is going to come, whether it's going to be tomorrow, next week, next month, or 5 years from now. But I really feel as though the understanding and the opportunities are accelerating. Philanthropic or federal or from the private sector, that really does make a difference.
You're right. You're absolutely right. And we've gained so much momentum over the past decade. The Ice Bucket Challenge is a perfect example of what funds brought to the ALS community in terms of accelerating research, and more than 10 new genes discovered, and so many trials supported, and research was supported through that. And so it's really wonderful to see how the community is coming together to grow this momentum and really accelerate ALS research. It's great. And sometimes I hesitate to use the word cure. And what does cure mean? And can we find a cure for many of the diseases? Diabetes doesn't have a cure, but can we make ALS a livable disease? And what would that take in terms of treatments, therapies, and not to ignore the other components of care. Multidisciplinary care goes a really long way, more than medications, in terms of providing the quality of life and meaning to cope with something like ALS. And so I think all of that really is just as important as trying to find a cure or look for a cure. So lots of questions coming out, and we have 5 minutes left. So let's see. There's a question about what's the status of DNL343. I can take that question. So this is one of the regimens in the HEALEY ALS platform trial. This is regimen G. And it's one of the regimens that enrolled really fast in less than a year. And we've enrolled lots of participants. And we are in the final follow-up phase right now with data cleaning. And once this is all completed, the next step is in terms of analyses and then looking forward to the top line results. So it is heading towards that finish line now. So we'll have more information shortly. There is another question here about what is N's secret sauce? I'm assuming N refers to never surrender. What is Never Surrender's secret sauce for generating such tremendous participation and fundraising?
I think, that we are different. It's about red carpet service, and that means going all out. It's about all the details. We are really built to help people. And that's kind of how we started. And instead of hiring a lot of people, we ask people in the community that are skilled in different areas to get involved and help us with our events. And you're always looking to kind of upgrade, to change it, to tweak. You're always studying what other successful organizations are doing and how you can maybe implement something they're doing into your events.
Wonderful. That's really remarkable. Everything that Never Surrender is doing in Minnesota. And can Never Surrender, another question for Mr. Kolquist, can Never Surrender lend its expertise to other geographic areas when we are unskilled?
Yes, we were very excited for the Thomasoni tour this year, which was our first year. We had invited Mass General. We had support coming from them. We also had ALS TDI that we invited out. And they also came, and now we're talking about, is there a possibility to be able to start? The snowmobile is a little more complicated unless you're in the northern part of the country. But I'm very excited and bullish on it. It's all about this bike ride. And I look across the country, there's so many walks and that are very successful. And I had never been on an e-bike, my wife or I, and 2 years ago we got e-bikes and participated. And it's a whole new opportunity because everybody can do it. And the e-bike is a wonderful vehicle to do it. So we're really excited about the opportunities, and we would gladly share and try to help other places in the country get an event going, do it right, and that will last and grow throughout the years.
Thank you, Mr. Kolquist. And I think we are nearing the end of this webinar. I want to thank Catherine for posting all the links in the chat box. Thank you for doing that. And such an enriching discussion and such a really remarkable work that you're doing with Never Surrender and the University of Minnesota. Thank you so much, Dr. Walk. Thank you so much, Mr. Kolquist. This has been a wonderful webinar, and I learned a lot from both of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yep.